Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Irina, and I'm the event planner for the Redmond Reactor Space. Before we get started, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenter. We do encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Useful links will also be shared in the chat. This session is recorded and will be available on demand in 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Which brings us to today's session. The session will run approximately 1 hour with questions throughout. And our speaker today is Sam Wronski, who's a regional cloud advocate, and I'll now turn it over to him.
Great. Hello, everybody. I am Sam Wronski. I'm a regional advocate here at Microsoft. My job is to help empower all of you to build really awesome things with Microsoft technology. So today we're going to be taking a look at building your own custom GitHub Actions. There's a number of ways you can do this, and there's a number of reasons you might want to do this. By creating custom actions, you're able to kind of streamline your workflows that operate across your entire build system. So this allows you to create custom tasks or condense a series of tasks into a smaller sequence and kind of create more reusable components that can be either be reused by your team or reused by the broader GitHub community, whichever you're sort of targeting. So these can either specifically focus on workflows that you need or more broad things that are just wrapping tools and making tools more accessible to people. So today we're going to look at creating 3 different custom actions using the 3 different available methods. That is JavaScript. So you can create JavaScript methods using the GitHub API, an SDK for that, or you can create your own containerized solutions. So you have whatever language you want. You can create a container that holds that build step and run that as part of your job, or you can use what's called a composite task. And these will take a series of scripts or other steps from different tasks and run those for you. So if you have a series of things that you always need to run when you're building your job or doing something like that, a composite task is going to be able to take all of those steps that you need to set things up or run tests over your project and make them reproducible. So you can just hand those to the other projects throughout your system. That's more useful if, for example, you're building a microservice and each of your services is in its own repo and needs its own tasks, but they're all based around the same core system and might just need a few parameters or something to change how they're working. So instead of duplicating your build system between every single task, you can instead reuse the same job, and then the job's updates will be reflected in all of those dependencies. Otherwise, if you're maintaining different build systems, you need to make sure you update every single project that's using it in order to make sure they all stay in sync. So this is the Learn module that we're kind of taking some inspiration from. I recommend checking this out if you want to learn more. There's a link in chat. It's aka.ms/custom GitHub Actions. We're going to not so much be following this verbatim. We're mostly going to be focusing on this first bit, that create a custom GitHub action, and we're going to be diving in much deeper. So that's sort of what we're trying to do. If you're curious what this is going to look like, it's this. So we're going to create something that just runs hello world from all 3 things, accepting an input parameter. In this case, I'm using a doc to run a custom container, a custom JavaScript action, and a custom composite action that take information from our job and run that for us. So we're going to walk through how to implement all 3 of these for you, and then hopefully show you how you can implement that into your own project. So I have this empty project, the Actions demo, with nothing in it. So to get started, we are going to start adding things to this. So we can start with any of the 3. To do this, they don't have dependencies on one another. They're entirely independent. There's different reasons you might choose a containerized action versus a JavaScript or TypeScript action versus a composite action, depending on what you need. If you just need to run a shell script as your action, you might use a composite action to do that. If you need to interact with GitHub a little bit more, there is a really nice API written for the JavaScript version of this that you can just grab and start using to interact with your things. Or if you want to build your own resources and build resources in whatever language you are actually developing your systems in. Maybe that's Go or .NET or Python or something else. Then you might want to write a container that wraps all of that stuff up. So let's get started by just adding a few things to this. So this is the current workflow. This is everything that's currently happening. We're just running this custom action on either a workflow dispatch, which means we can manually trigger this job, or on a push. Mostly we're going to be looking at the push update, but the workflow dispatch is there just for helpful stuff if we need it. And then we just have this, which is checking out our repository. That's it. That's all that's happening. So if we go and check out what's in our project, it's just this. It's the GitHub workflows, the README, and then we do have the .git because I have unhidden that in my repo. If you are looking at the same repo or have the same code base, you won't see that .git in there unless you've specifically enabled it in Visual Studio Code. So what we need to do is kind of build these actions. So what this looks like is a custom folder. So I'm going to just call this shell. And we're going to add an action to this. So the action.yaml is what defines what your job is actually going to do. So that's what's actually used to declare, here's this action, here's the role it's going to do, here's the description about it, and here's what it's going to run and execute. So this gives GitHub some configuration to actually pull your job and run it. So that's just a YAML document, which is going to have a custom GitHub action in it. We need a description. All right, there we go. And this is just a quick demo action. And then we're going to skip the inputs for now. So you can add inputs and outputs to these actions so that you can use pass things in, for example, secrets if you need parameters or something like that, or outputs if you want to use things further down the chain in other actions. You can provide outputs. For us, we're going to skip that and just use a using composite. So we're going to start with a composite task, which lets us just run a either a shell script or composite a series of steps from our GitHub action. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to add a steps file, and then we're going to run echo hello world. So most of these I'm focusing on creating a relatively quick thing to print out. So in this case, we're just running hello world, and we're going to probably copy that in for most of these. The goal there is to kind of demonstrate what these are and how you can use them, rather than to necessarily give you a full demo, just because I kind of want to cover all three. So that's sort of what we're doing. You can definitely extend this beyond. You can even add in this composite step, because it's just a series of steps. You can add additional things or even reference additional GitHub actions from other resources if you would like to. It also can reference a shell script if you would prefer. So instead of hard coding whatever you're going to execute here, you can reference a shell script somewhere else in the repo to execute. And so this now defines our action. What it's going to say is this action runs using this composite action, and it's going to run these steps. So in this case, it's going to execute hello world and print that out to our screen. So it's not going to change any documents. It's not going to do any of that stuff. It's just going to show hello world in the output for this action. And so what we can do now is add that as a step to our workflow. So when we actually run this, we should be able to see that. Let me see here how that works. And so how this works is we give it a name, just like the other actions. So we're going to do a custom composite action. There we go. And we are going to say it uses. And so this is the sort of unique part. We're actually pointing, instead of using something else, like referencing another repo, like the checkout task is doing here, we're actually going to reference a directory here. So we're going to reference the shell directory, and we're going to leave it there, getting into inputs later. So if we go and commit these, what we should see is hello world pop up in our action now. So we're going to say add composite action. And so this should, once we push this up to our repo, run this composite action as part of our build step. So we now have a shell script sort of encoded here as this task, and we can change that task, and everything referencing it in all of our build actions is going to reuse this. So there's a few reasons that's useful. If you maybe in the same GitHub action or GitHub project, you are referencing, you have multiple workflow files that are referencing similar actions, this allows you to kind of roll those all up into one thing. And so then you can reuse those across all the workflow files. Or you can actually distribute this. You can publish this and allow other people to use this either internally or, again, across GitHub. So if we go and look at our actions now, we see it completed successfully. And so if we go and run this, we can see there's a new line here. That's the custom composite action. And if we expand this, you can see it ran our hello world and printed out hello world for us. So that's our composite action. And so that's everything you need in order to just get started with these. There's not too much there that's required. It's 7 lines. The next two get increasingly more complicated. So this is sort of where I recommend you start if you can, especially if things have like a CLI or something, you can work with that. But again, it's different. I didn't mean to click that. Let's ignore that. So you have all of this. You can kind of customize it however you want. The next thing we're going to do is add a JavaScript version of this. So this gets more complicated, and we might need a terminal. So what this does is allow us to execute a JavaScript action. So we're going to just copy this action file into this JavaScript folder, and we need to make a few modifications to make this actually work. There's no longer a steps thing here. And instead, we're actually changing this from composite to the version of node that we want to run this with. So we're going to choose node 16. And then we need to provide the JavaScript file to run with this. So we're just going to do main.js. That doesn't exist. We need to create that still. We will get to that in just a second. Quick demo action, that should be fine. So we can leave everything else as it is. We're reusing the same name, but that's fine as far as demos are concerned. So with this, we need to create that main.js file. And so for this, we should just be able to do console.log hello world and write that out. And that should be everything. This might not work right away because I actually haven't tested just this out. So we're going to see. But you should be able to just upload this and have it run your hello world. There might be some additional requirements here that I'll get to in just a bit. We might need to actually create initialize this as an npm repo, but I think we might be able to get around that. So let's test. If not, we'll see what happens when these fail. So add JavaScript action. Cool. And so we can push that up and run this. And so if we look at our actions now, we should see another one get kicked off here. There it is. And so we can kind of watch this run. It will get added there. And I didn't add, this is important. I didn't tell it to run. Without that, it's not going to do anything in the first place. So we're just running our shell action. Let's add our custom JavaScript action. So this is looking at our JavaScript folder. So the uses needs to point to a directory with an action.yaml file in it. That's the criteria here. So because both of these now have that, this should be fine, and it will use that as a reference to create new things. So from here, we should be able to actually update this and have it run, because that wasn't a very good test. So we're going to do add update, add JavaScript to GitHub config. So we'll add that. This will actually tell it to run. If we sync those changes up, it will actually trigger the job for us because that's another push to our repo. And so now that we have these custom actions running, hopefully we'll see it get added there. And we'll see what happens. And so there it is. It's setting up the job. This will take a bit just to get us some more results. And it looks like it ran, and we got hello world. So there you go. Another relatively quick thing to run. We just have a main.js with a single line of code in it. And then we have this, instead of pointing and explicitly saying run this script, instead it's just going and pointing. This is actually less lines of code than the composite task, just because we only need one line for this instead of the 3 here. So again, they're fairly short. They're fairly quick to write. It gets more complicated afterwards. That JavaScript task is going to get much bigger by the end of this demo, but that's okay. So now we're moving to like the more complicated, I guess, version of this, which is a container. So you can actually have it run a containerized task, which means you can contain anything you would like. For this, we're not going to be doing anything fancy. At the end of this, I have a demo for what I use for my own websites that runs a .NET task to go and actually pull videos from YouTube and create blog articles from those things. We're going to be doing something a little bit quicker, and we're going to be focusing on just running a shell script again. So in this case, we need that script. Going to echo hello world. And then we also need a Docker file to contain that script. So in this case, we're using Docker as a way to isolate this. The reason you'd want to use Docker is if you have environments that do not work in the other two. And we're using a script mostly because it's the fastest way to do this. We don't have to write anything to compile or anything like that. We could use Python or something, but I'm less familiar with Python, so we're sticking with a script. It also means we can reuse code between these actions and kind of hopefully demo this. But the cool thing with Docker files and using containers for this is that it isn't tied to any specific environment. You do inherit some of the other issues with using Docker. For example, containers and containers becomes more complicated in this scenario. But if you need specific things that fit better into this, or you need to run tools that need this special environment, this is what I would recommend. So it's sort of up to you. So for this Docker file, we're just going to run from Ubuntu and just kind of throw together a really quick container here. Grab our script and copy that over to our script location. We're going to give ourselves execute permissions on that. Do this. And then add an entry point to list what we're actually going to run. So we're going to run our script.sh. And there we go. You'll note I don't need to build this or push this up to a container registry. GitHub Actions is going to build this container for us when we run this. So there's no need to store this in a container registry yet. So that's sort of something when you're developing these or building these internally. The downside is this means every time you kick off your action, you're going to rebuild your container, which depending on the container you're using might take a long time. So depending on what that looks like, keep that in mind, because it might boost up your build times and you probably don't want to do that. For this, we also need our action just to use that. And so for the action, it's very similar to what we were using previously. Instead, we're just providing Docker as the thing we're going to run. And then instead of main, we need to provide an image. So we're going to give it the Docker file. So this lets you post this to anywhere else. So if you want this to exist in some other location, for example, you can provide a Docker file, and that will work. So let's add this now as our third and final example. So custom container action. And we're going to point at the container. So there you go. That's the third one. And we should be able to just push this up and run this as well. We should see all of them get kicked off. Add custom container action. And so in this case, we've added these 3 different actions that all do different things. The next step of this is actually being able to define the action and define things to actually input into this. Right now, we're just running a task, and it's always going to do the same thing because there's no parameters, there's no way to change this. What we typically want is some way to input arguments. That's sort of where we're headed next after we sort of make sure this is all working, is take this and then make sure it works. Or in this case, doesn't work. What did I do wrong? Exec format error. Oh no. I might have missed something. So if we go back here, I guess that's actually kind of a good example. It shows you will get some sort of error when this fails. I'm not entirely sure what this error is, but we will get there in a second. I'm assuming this is some issue in our entry point. So we will just quickly take a look at that. But if you get an error, it's just going to appear like another error in your GitHub Actions. And so you'll get errors back out, and you can take those and kind of try to figure out what's going on. It just might mean that there's issues further into your stack than you might be used to. So there we go. Let's go and figure out what I did wrong. So if we look at our script, echo hello world, let's add this here because I forgot that when I was doing it. I don't think that should be what we need, but just to double check, it might be. But mostly right now I'm just comparing this between what I have that works and what I have that doesn't. This isn't always the case. You don't always have a working copy to reference, but in this case I do. So we're going to try to do that. But I think that might have been the only thing. Typically when I see something like this, my first go-to is to search for this. That's not what I wanted. So we want some sort of Docker container, check that, and you'll get some results. Error format error. In this case, we could dig deeper into this. Looks like it needs to pull something. We'll see. But I think adding that, I always forget what the name of it is. The hashtag and then the exclamation mark. It's like a shebang, I believe is the name of it, but I could be wrong. That declares what to actually run this with. So we're saying run this with bash. That could have been the issue there. So let's try this. And this is sort of one of the ways that you can kind of debug these things. So we're gonna do this live. Update script, container script. There we go. So if we do that and push that up, we'll be able to see if that actually changes anything. It might, but we'll see. Because there are some changes that I did just make in between all of this. So we'll see. But these are the, I guess, 3 different ways you can run these containers or these actions. You can have a container, a JavaScript file, or a composite task. Each of those are going to give you a different way to run things. I kind of went through them in the way that I would recommend approaching this. So starting with composite tasks is a way to kind of condense things. If you need something that interacts more with GitHub, focusing on the JavaScript and TypeScript stuff, or if you need something that is very custom for what you're trying to do, taking the container approach. There are, again, some downsides with the container approach that will limit what you can actually do in them. I mentioned containers in containers. You cannot run containers inside of containers. It doesn't really like that. So if you're interacting and trying to create and test containers from inside of your container action, you might run into issues. So for that, you'd probably want something else. There are potentially a few other things, but it does give you the advantage of being able to run any language or any other containerized bit of code that you might want. And it looks like that fixed. That was the one issue, is we missed the I think it's shebang operator at the top of our file. And so now that that's there, we get hello world. So what I'd like to do instead is, instead of having to say hello world, let's have it say hello and then the name of something. So because we have all of these, we want to be able to actually input a name into each of these different tasks. So we're going to kind of walk through each of these again and modify them so that they accept an input parameter. So we can actually provide inputs to these tasks. So the way that works is there's actually a set of inputs here. There is also outputs if you would like to output things. I have found these less useful, but there might be cases where you need to output things that can be used in other tasks. This is how you would do that. I don't intend to cover them here. So again, follow that link in the description, and you'll be able to get through that. But for this, we want to define our inputs. So this is just a keyed system. So we want to define our input. In this case, we're going to call it our name. Sure. Name might be a bad name, a bad thing to use, actually. Let's call it our username. There. That might be a better description. Name has a tendency to become a used type like we have here. So trying to avoid that. So if we add a description here, this is going to define what that is. So just a username to welcome. And then we can set if it's required or not. So I'm going to say this is required. So if it's not provided, you'll get an error back saying that you need to provide this. And so what this has done is add that as an argument here. And then we want to actually interact with that. So GitHub provides a way to do that. And it's their string interpolation syntax. So it's a $sign with 2 brackets. And then it's inputs, and then the name of the thing you want to use as that. So inputs.username will reference this username input. This is similar to how you reference secrets and other things, except we're using the inputs instead of the secrets. So in this case, we're now saying hello, and then that whatever that username was. And then in our action, we want to use this. We need to provide some information here. So we can just do that with the with argument provides that information, and we'll call this username the reactor stream. So now let's say hello reactor stream. So if we push this now, hopefully, if I haven't screwed this up, we should see add greeting. That's not right. Greeting to composite action. Cool. And so now what we should see is it will actually take this input from us and incorporate that into the output. This is the easiest way to do this because it's just using the inputs. You can directly interpolate it into your strings. It gets more complicated once we get into the JavaScript and the container side of things. But for here, it just works. So if we go and check this out, we should be able to see that run now. So it's still going to run all 3 actions, but the one we care about is the composite action, which now says hello reactor stream. So now we have a custom greeting that we can change to do this. So in this case, you probably don't need to change who you're greeting in your GitHub action, but this is the same thing you might need if you need to accept some secrets, or you might need to accept something else. So if you need some API to reference, to call it to, or some project that you want to build and you want to reference that specifically, or some file that you want to run a markdown conversion on or something like that, this is the same thing. And it's just a list, a named list of different things that you want to reference. So you can just add additional arguments here. So we could do username, and we might have one for greeting as well that talks about what the greeting is, and use that instead of hello, for example. This is just intended as a way to kind of get information in, and it makes tasks more reusable, so you can constantly keep reusing them. So that's that. The next one is going to be very similar. We can actually just copy this and add our inputs here. The downside is we're referencing a JavaScript file. So we're referencing this. There's no way for us to interpolate this or get that in. So this gets a little bit more complicated. In order to do this, we're going to initialize a npm repository in this. So we're going to do an npm init with a y. That's just going to accept all of these arguments for us. So if we do this, we'll get a really quick npm project. And so that's going to set that up for us. And then we want to npm install actions core. I believe this is it. I am not an expert on JavaScript. So this is something that I'm somewhat less familiar with. But what this will do is grab the actions core package. If you don't know what that is a package provided by GitHub. There's a number of these that allow you to actually interact from actions with other parts of the repository. So we're going to use this as a way to actually pull these parameters out. This also gives you a bunch of other information about what the repository is what the current state of that repository is, and ways for you to actually interact directly with GitHub. So there's a number of these. We're using the core one, but there are other different packages that you can reference. I believe when we go up, you'll see them. And so these allow you to do things like access caching. And so if you want to define custom caching things or otherwise change how this works, this is where you would go. And this is one of the reasons why the JavaScript version is so powerful, because you won't find these in the on the Docker side. You won't get these in your containers. There isn't a library for this. And same thing with the composite task. Those are for like scripting and things. This allows you a little bit more access and a little bit more freedom to kind of inject behavior into your repository and change what it's doing. So that's what we're doing. That's why we're grabbing this package, so we can actually grab these input parameters. And so once we have that, we need to actually pull that in and reference it. So we're going to grab that. So just require our actions core. So this is actually going to pull that in for us and give us a way to reference that. And then we want to actually get that name. So constant name to greet, I guess. And that's not right. There you go. And we're going to look at our core import that we just had and get the input from this. So this is getting an input parameter out of that. And we're going to look for our username. So who to greet. And then instead of hello world, we're just going to throw in some string interpolation into this. So name to greet. And I need to change my quotes here. And there we go. And so now we have a way to actually greet this user. I'm not sure why it doesn't like this. That's why. There we go. Cool. I'm all over the place, but we got there. And I have 3 different quotes in this file. This is interesting. So what we have here is we're importing that core package that allows us to actually access this. Then we have our name to greet, which is coming out of that input parameter right here. And then we're actually just incorporating that into the action that we're actually performing. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but in this case, we can actually start interacting a little bit more directly with GitHub. In this case, it's similar stuff that you can use. We're just using this to grab an input file, but this gives you an example of some of the things that you can actually use if you start pulling these packages in and start using them. They're pretty neat. So worth checking out if that's something you want. If you want something that interacts with GitHub in a new way, this is a good place to start. So now that we have that, let's commit this. So the downside with this is now we have all these files. And so you do have to commit your node modules directory as part of this. So the downside is now we have a relatively large number of files getting added to our repository by doing this. but it does give us that advantage. So you kind of somewhat have to balance these. So we're going to add our JavaScript input, and this is going to fail actually if I do this. So let's do that and fail because we haven't provided a parameter yet. So this isn't going to work. This is going to cause another error for us. So if we run this, add JavaScript input, and commit this, we should see this action fail because we said we required that parameter and we didn't provide it. So let me refresh here. That's the wrong repository. That would help. So we jump over here. We should see this fail once we actually get to. Never mind. Why didn't it fail? That's interesting. I don't actually know. We did say it was required. So maybe I've done something else. But anyway, I don't have an answer for why that didn't trigger an error. I don't quite know. But yeah, that's a thing. So let's actually add this parameter so we get the correct greeting that we're kind of aiming for. And then if we run this, we can do add username to JavaScript action. And then we can run this. And that should go off. And then the next thing we're going to do is kind of take a look at the container action, which we can actually look at right here. So this is everything that you're getting when you run a container action. This is the command that gets run to run this. This final bit is the SHA of the container image that was built in order to run your container. But you will get a whole bunch of information included in this, including a number of extra information about your GitHub repository. So you will get the SHA of your current commit. You'll get the repository and the repository owner and information like that. That all gets pushed in. When we add a parameter here, we'll actually be able to see where that gets added. And then we can use that as a way to sort of reference that inside of the container. So there's a few different ways to actually do this. This is the way that I found to do it. I do it in two different ways, so it's a little bit confusing. But the way the simpler way is sort of what I'm going to do, and then I'll show the more complicated way that I don't know. So let's add that. Let's do a with username, and we're just going to add the username now. And there we go. And so we can just commit this and add username to container action. There we go. And run this. That will push up and trigger another job. Again, we're triggering every push. So that's going to keep running things over and over and over again. But anyway, what this should do is either fail or give us information about where it's going to end up. And I'm not entirely sure which one. Also, something that can be helpful when you're testing these is to move them further up in the thing you're running. And that can help you get more information quicker, especially if you have long running CI jobs, like tests. If you're running end-to-end tests or something, putting jobs at the very end to see if they're going to work or not can burn a lot of time because you're waiting over and over to see if the tests work. So with that, it might help if you're kind of testing this on a live production site or something that you're actually has active development and builds in less or more than 6 seconds, like this one. Figuring out how to kind of disable certain actions and bring those build times back down will make iterating on these a lot faster, and will generally improve the developer experience overall. So worth looking into. So here we go. Unexpected inputs. We get an error, a warning here that we added a username here, but it's not expected. And it doesn't look like we're actually using it. Typically, these are going to get tacked on at the very end as a parameter into your action, it doesn't exist here. So again, we're still just invoking this thing. So there's actually it's not exposed even though we provided it. It won't be shown at all to our container until we actually go and update that action file. So let's do that. Again, this is the same thing. These inputs are the same across all of the different forms of this. The only thing that's going to change is this runs bit. That's going to reference it, and then how you actually interact with the parameters here. So in this case, we're passing an input in. So let's commit this, add a username, and commit that. And then if we sync these changes up, we should see them actually used now. The way this works is it gets tacked onto the very end of your command. What that means is it's passed in exactly like a command line argument is in any other script. So that's how you interact with these in this case. It's slightly less nice because it's unnamed. So you have to kind of keep the order in the same order. Otherwise, you might run into some issues. But if we look here, I still don't see it. Interesting. Add username. Sorry, just double checking here because I kind of expected this to do something different. Interesting. Okay. I'm not sure then what's going on. It looks like I've missed something. Or oh, never mind. I have missed something. It's a slightly different change though. We need to pass arguments into this to actually state how we're going to do this. Because the Docker file doesn't have a reference to what's actually coming in, it doesn't have a reference to the parameters or anything like that. It doesn't have access to your host system. They're intentionally sort of separated. You can't just go and grab these variables. So we need to actually pass them in. So we're going to do a list of arguments, just like you would pass in with a normal CLI thing. So this is again using the same syntax as before with the composite task. We're just passing them as arguments, and they'll be numbered arguments, just like what would happen if you tried to pass these in to another program. And so now we're tacking on this username to the end, and so it should show up now. Add username. And there we go. Also, if anybody has any questions about any of this or has been using this and kind of has some comments or questions from that, definitely feel free to drop them in chat. More than happy to go on those tangents and help answer those questions. And then we can pick back up or connect with whatever makes sense. In this case, let's see here. Username finished. And now, hopefully, we see reactor stream gets added onto the end here. It does get quoted, so we aren't getting multiple command line arguments out of this. It is quoted, so that should be fine. And then we have everything else that being the same. So this gives us a way to actually interact with this, because now we have arguments coming in. And so we can interact with this just like we would in another bash script, or if you're using .NET, for example, your main script is going to have those parameters coming in. You can use that in the same way. In this case, we should just need a hello $1. That's going to grab the first argument here. $0 is the name of the command itself, which we do not want to grab. That will grab something else. But this should get us that initial argument for us. So let's do that. Let's add hello argument. I guess that works. There we go. We can push this up. And now we should see all three of these now have different action or different inputs coming in that they can use to reference this. I need to stop switching because that's I just close that. So once this runs, hopefully we will see things. Another important thing to kind of note here, our container action is taking substantially longer than the other two actions combined. This one's taking 2 seconds, and the other ones are sub 1 second. The reason for that is we're building our container here. We expand all of this. We're building a container. If that container is more complicated than just a shell script, if you're relying on Java or Python or .NET and you need to actually pull dependencies and do other things, every single time you run this action, it's doing this step. It's pulling your container, your root container image, and it's actually running and building your image. So if that's not a quick thing, ours is intentionally very small. But if you start building more complicated projects, this can balloon quite quickly and increase your build time beyond what you might want to happen. But anyway, we do have a working thing. So it's now getting that parameter and actually running it and able to actually pull that out. So we're able to do that. I don't know why I tried to save a web page, but there we go. So that is 3 different ways to run and set up containers. They're custom containers for you to kind of do. We do not have time to kind of go through this entire thing. I would recommend, if you're kind of following along, to check out at aka.ms/custom GitHub Actions. There's an exercise attached to this. And this will actually take you over to the GitHub Learning Lab, which you can follow along. And this will actually walk you through the entire thing. What's the advantage of building a container if you never reuse it? So if you're actually building this for release, you should be able to reuse that container and actually store it in a container registry or something like that. We're not, because this is sort of a development environment. It's just a local thing. But if that was something you needed to do, then you could reference a pre-built thing. The advantage of using containers in general is it gives you the ability to kind of run anything you want. So instead of being restricted sort of to shell scripts and a JavaScript client, this gives you the ability to write whatever you want. So if you have all of your infrastructure defined in and all of your tooling and stuff defined in .NET or in Java or in Python or some other language, this gives you a way to kind of port those tools directly into different actions that you can then reuse. So that's slightly different than maybe trying to re-implement them in something else or manually trying to invoke them and install them using a shell script, which also I see plenty of times. It's pretty common for people to just to say, I need to install this, apt-get this, or however you're going to actually manage that, install this, run this, do all of that. So there's a bunch of different ways to approach it. I found containers nice because I tend to write things in .NET, and then I want to reuse it. But yeah, actually, that kind of leads into this. So this is my website. So we're just going to quickly jump into this custom action. So there's a lot more going on here, but this is also based off of a Docker file. I built this years ago, but the intention of this is to actually build and run a .NET project that actually goes and scrapes all of the video content that I've created off of YouTube, pulls that down, and then converts that into markdown files that my website can publish. So that's what's going on in this. And so I implemented all of that in .NET and then wanted a custom GitHub action to run that automatically for me. So this entire thing is actually just running on a cron job every day. And then if there's new things, it just creates a pull request against my repo. So that's in here. And so we have this cron job here that gets fired off. And then this is invoking the action. So it's a very similar thing to what we were doing. I've just expanded this a little bit further. So now instead of just one thing saying hello, we're now invoking an entire .NET project with a bunch of different arguments that actually outputs a bunch of video files that I can actually create a pull request for and actually update this. So more complicated, I guess. But the same stuff is happening here. This action.yaml is just slightly longer, but it's the same thing. We just have more inputs and more arguments, but it's doing the same thing. So hopefully that's helpful or interesting. I found this really helpful when I initially created it. It's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of put this talk together, because things like this make everything faster. It makes it nicer for you to do things. And this took out an entire like maintenance cycle of trying to maintain certain parts, because I can reuse the content that I'm already doing. Similar things can be used across different systems that you might be working with. If you have certain things that you constantly are running, or certain configurations that you have across a number of projects, especially if you have like a non-mono repoed set of microservices, you might be building a whole bunch of different things in a very similar manner. And so one of the ways you can kind of consolidate all of that work and make sure that if you improve one, you improve all of them, is by putting them all into a GitHub action and then using that. Do I reuse my container? In this case, no. I've kind of intentionally left it. I do not care necessarily about the runtime. This cron job is scheduled to run at like 2 a.m. or something. And so that's not necessarily the concern here. This is less time sensitive because it's not scheduled to run on like a pull request or a push. It's scheduled to run on a daily basis. So as long as it doesn't take more than a day, it doesn't really matter to me. So it's easier for me if I don't actually build and store it in some sort of container registry, because then changes to the code are automatically picked up, because it's going to be rebuilt as part of the action. So what this means is that if I change any of the logic of this app, of this custom action, because it's constantly rebuilding that image, it means I'm constantly re-pulling that down. So I don't need to, there's no risk of it potentially getting out of sync with versions or something, where I make an update to the logic here, and then it doesn't get reflected in what I've actually built. So that's sort of my thinking there. But there's definitely different ways to take that. This is sort of a personal project that I put together. So it was just intended to save me time. So depending on what you're going to use that for, you might use it for different things. But if people have other questions, we do have time. So I'm more than happy to answer them for the next couple of minutes. But that's mostly, I think, everything I wanted to cover. Just kind of get you hopefully interested in building custom actions, or at least seeing how they work. Because all of the actions that you see out on GitHub, just kind of going back, actually, we're here. So let's look at these. So if we go and look at like the workflows here, these are all the custom actions. So you have action/checkout. That's a GitHub repository. That's a community action. Same thing with this one down here. This is developed by somebody else, released by somebody else, and we're just referencing it. If you go and look at the repo for different actions built across GitHub and you try to pull those in, that's how you can get them. That's how you can access them. So it gives you different ways to kind of do that and start kind of building actions that hopefully don't just extend what you're doing, but can potentially help anybody else on GitHub using the tools that you're using, which is neat. It does mean there's some potential security things that you have to be worried about if you're actually starting to use third-party actions, but that's a whole separate story. But hopefully interesting. And I think that's one of the cool things with GitHub Actions as a whole is it's all just source code pointing at other source code. So you can kind of build as a community all the tools that you might need, or reuse whatever the community is doing. If you're curious like how these things work, you can just go and find it. So like if we grab this extension here, we can just go to GitHub and type it right. There we go. And so this will take us to that custom action. And so from here, you can explore that. You can see there's an action. And this is the same stuff just for that. There's a little bit more here. But this is how those actions are working. So if you're trying to understand how these actions that you're looking at are working, or trying to figure out how to kind of track through them, this gives you hopefully a way to kind of start entering into that. Look for the actions.yaml, and that will kind of let you know, because from here we can now tell it's running on node 16 and it's going to invoke this dist/index.js. So what is that? We can go in here, not in there, into this index.js, and it will run whatever this is. Or freeze my browser. There we go. Looks like there's a whole bunch here, but it's running this. So you can kind of use that as a way to kind of navigate through how all of this stuff works. And I think that's cool. So thanks everyone for joining in. I haven't seen any other questions yet. So if not, I guess we'll kind of wrap things up. If you did like this and you want to kind of encourage us to do more sessions like this, or you want us to do something else and maybe suggest different content or something like that, we do have a survey link here. It's aka.ms/reactor/survey. That tells us, gives us a little bit more feedback about what we're doing right and maybe what we could improve on. And then the event code for that is 15960. And that will kind of tie that back to this. Do you have to pay a fee to run cron job every night? No. GitHub Actions has set time limits. I don't know them off the top of my head, but GitHub Actions has specific time limits for different repos. So if you have a free repo, you have a set number of minutes, I believe, that your jobs can run. So when we're talking about durations of jobs, these are like 2 seconds, 1 second, etc. But if you start running much longer running jobs that take hours to finish or something like that, then you might start running into those. For us, especially on free things, you're not probably going to hit that very quickly. The limit does change. For example, if you start running this on like Mac runners, those are billed at a higher volume. So like 1 minute, I believe, is 10 minutes. I would need to double check this. But that's sort of how that works. And it's different depending on the type of repo. So private repos are different than public repos. And that also changes depending on the GitHub subscription you might have. But yeah, but there's a whole thing on that. I don't know where to find it. GitHub hours, GitHub Actions. Time, there we go. I don't know. I may need to find this. If you want to ping me on like Twitter or something, my username is in my name there. I can find this for you. But it will take a little bit more time than maybe we have here. But it is out on the GitHub site, and so you can find more information about that. But it's based off of the time your jobs run, not necessarily what triggers them or how they would run. So anyway, thanks so much for the good questions. Those are fantastic topics, and I think, end it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks everyone for joining. Have a great one.